This is a map of Singapore, a small island and city-state jammed in between Malaysia and Indonesia. Although small, Singapore has one of the highest GDP per capita in the entire world. In addition, Singapore is one of the most populous countries when you take landmass into consideration, as 6 million people live in the country, which is only 734 square kilometers in size. To compare that to a city of the same size, Lexington, Kentucky only houses 320,000 people. Having this many people in such a small space means that there needs to be a good way to get around, and that is exactly what makes Singapore so special. Singapore's impeccable urban design includes an extensive network of sustainable transportation options, most notably a large public transportation system and a strong emphasis on cycling. To show the significance of this network, take a look at this map showcasing Singapore's Mass Rapid Transit System, or shortened MRT system. Upon closer examination, you'll realize that public transport seamlessly connects not only different parts of the city's center, but also extends to the suburban region. This accessibility to public transport ensures residents, whether they live in the central city or in the outskirts, that they can conveniently get around. The MRT and buses run at frequent rates, and while buses differ from line to line, the wait is usually no longer than 10 minutes. But the trains are even faster, as they arrive every 2 to 4 minutes in rush hours. However, due to the small size of the country, the MRT system, and thirdly, the fact that 80% of Singaporeans live in apartments, most people do not own a car. It is simply not needed. As of 2022, there were a total of 995,000 motor vehicles in Singapore, whereof 532,000 of them were private cars. This means that the car owner rate in Singapore is approximately 10%, or just below 18% if you include commercial vehicles. To compare it, the US population in 2021 was 332 million, and in the same year there were 278 million registered personal and commercial vehicles. This puts the US car owner rate at 83%. However, there's more to it than people just preferring to use public transport. It's also due to the insane pricing of cars in Singapore. As an example, a family car like a Hyundai Santa Fe starts at just above $36,000 in the US. However, if you were looking to buy the same car in Singapore, the starting price is $178,000. Now this price may seem very steep, and well, that's because it is. This is because Singapore wants to keep as few cars on the road as possible, but not completely remove them. This then means that people use the public transit system, which oftentimes is actually faster, but also because it is better for the environment and prevents traffic congestion. However, the starting price is not the only price that you are paying when buying a car in Singapore, as you need a certificate of entitlement, or COE, drive on the roads in Singapore, which lasts 10 years. The current prices for a COE for a smaller vehicle starts at $71,000, while for a larger car like the Hyundai Santa Fe, you would have to pay $88,000. This means that the total price for your new Santa Fe in Singapore is $266,000, not including any other costs such as repairs or maintenance. And for the same money, you could have bought 7 of the same car in the US and still have spare change. However, due to the country being such a small size, comparing it to the US as a whole isn't totally fair. Singapore is built to make the most of what it has, and this also means that not only do people fare on metro and buses, but it also has an extensive network of bike paths. Currently in the country of Singapore, 525 kilometers of cycling paths exist. This means that Singapore has a larger network of bike paths than the top 3 most bike-friendly cities, which are Copenhagen with 380 kilometers of bike paths, Utrecht with 420 kilometers, and even Amsterdam with 515 kilometers. And not only does Singapore currently have the biggest bike path network in the world, it is also working to expand it by almost 3 times, as the government plans to have 1,300 kilometers bike path by 2030. And biking is not the only other form of transport, as you can walk just about everywhere in the country. This includes both covered walkways, pedestrian streets, but also bridges, as there are more than 600 pedestrian overhead bridges. The most popular of these are the Jubilee Bridge and the longest pedestrian bridge in Singapore, the Helix Bridge. If you need to go short distances in Singapore, walking is almost always the best option, and you can even walk if you just needed to do some shopping. There are even certain areas in Singapore, such as Orchard Road, that have pedestrian priority zones, where vehicle access is restricted or limited, which creates a more pedestrian-friendly environment. And not only is it a great feature to the city that you can walk, you can also feel safe while doing it. This is due to Singapore having one of the lowest crime rates in the world, and it is also due to Singapore Singapore having very strict laws and punishments. As an example, if you are convicted of smuggling more than 500 grams of cannabis or 15 grams of heroin into Singapore, you'll receive the death penalty. And while some people may believe that laws like these are extreme, it is also what Singapore is built on. Due to the country being of such small size and housing so many people, it is important that everyone can feel safe. And it is also what has made Singapore into the country that it is today. If you travel to Singapore, you will feel this safety as the first thing when you land in the Changi Airport. The Changi Airport is often regarded as one of the best airports in the entire world, as it is not only exceptionally effective, it also has a great layout minimizing walking distances. The airport also features the infamous mall by the name of Jewel. This mall, however, isn't just a bunch of stores side by side like it is in many other airports, as it features its iconic rain vortex and indoor waterfall. This is also an example of incorporating green spaces and to promote environmental sustainability. However, these green spaces are not only found inside the airport, they are found across Singapore. Although Singapore is a densely populated city and residents live in sky-high apartments, they are never far from a green space such as a park. Singapore's commitment to creating green spaces, parks and gardens has also become a part of its cultural identity. A great example of these parks are the Singapore Botanic Gardens, which is also the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Singapore. Another example is a Sky Park on top of the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, a green area which is more than 300 meters long. This commitment is also visible in the Singaporean government's Green Plan, as they aim to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve this, one of the first steps will be to set aside 50% more land for nature parks by 2030, which will result in all residents living no longer than a 10-minute walk from a park. Another part of the Green Plan is for Singapore to have an energy reset. They have already started this by only using natural gas as fossil fuel. Furthermore, Singapore will quadruple the solar energy deployment by 2025, including covering the rooftops of public housing blocks with solar panels. Another interesting part of the Green Plan is that Singapore aims to completely remove combustion engine vehicles by 2040, which will start by requiring all newly registered cars to be cleaner energy models by 2030. And while all of this may sound great, it has come at the cost of many historical buildings, and most of the architecture you will find in Singapore are the high-rise buildings. There are, however, some conservation zones such as Chinatown, Kampong Glam and Little India. These zones aim to protect the cultural heritage and historical significance of the neighborhoods. And this is relatively important, as historical buildings are not only a part of a city's identity, they also show the city's roots. For a city like Singapore, this is definitely something that is important, as it is over a short period of time shifted from a small and poor country to one of the most developed countries in the world. It's also great to have some architecture that stands out in a positive way, which a neighborhood like Kampong Glam especially does when compared to the skyscrapers of Singapore. Furthermore, preserved architecture often boosts both local businesses but also tourism. This means that conservation zones aren't necessarily negative in terms of an economic standpoint. Finally, preserving buildings is also the last chance to preserve the past. Having historical buildings in a futuristic city like Singapore makes these districts feel like time capsules. If Singapore did not have districts like these, it would most certainly not have the same kind of feel and cultural identity. Having preserved architecture also ensures that residents don't forget where they came from and where they are now. Singapore's diversity as a city is what makes it into such an ideal place. And while a utopia like this may not be possible everywhere, city planners worldwide can still take great inspiration from Singapore.